I've seen it, though you won't believe it. It's a miracle year in which we're living. Come on outside, it's a beautiful day. A gentle breeze blows across the ocean, sending waves that crash upon the sand. Hey mister, did you watch Slow Down again? There is time for you to smell the flowers, even though the thorns get in the way. Hey mister, what's your theory for today? Ooh, I've seen it, though you won't believe it. It's a miracle year in which we're living. Come on outside, it's a beautiful day.
Oh, come on outside, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. What you're about to see is out of this world. Step right up now, don't be shy, because we're about to show you how cars can fly.
Here's a tale of a suburban housewife who dares to fight with the icon of his day, and she finds her own miracle on the way. I said, hey now, life's a joy. You gotta try your best and give your all, and when the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts again. Ooh, I've seen it, though you won't believe it. It's a miracle year in which we're living. Come on outside, it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Silence. If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. I'm David de Hilster. You've reached Saturday Science Chats. Man, I need to warm up before I get on air, folks. But today you're gonna try to convince me that ether exists. Hello again. I'm David de Hilster, and we are the Saturday Science Chats. And this is sponsored by the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society and Dissident Science. And if you are a person that normally or wants to come into the green room, well, guess what? I had it all screwed up. I didn't have that a couple of minutes before the broadcast. I realized I did not fix this link because every week I've got to change this, what we call subdomain, to point to the right place. So if you are trying to get into the green room, that is, if you want to chat with me live, tell me why ether exists, you can do so by going to live.naturalphilosophy.org, and you can get in. I know normally we have 5 or 6 or 7 people that are always here, and they didn't get in. They're probably trying to figure out why. But again, today we're going to be talking about ether. And you can, also in the comments, if you would like to ask a question, you can, let's see right here. I've got a little instruction for that right here. So I'll get to that a little bit later. I'm sorry, again, discombobulated, because when you go in the air and realize your whole green room entrance door is locked and people are outside waiting to get in, that's a problem. So let me go ahead and start. I do see people coming in now to the green room, so again, I apologize. If you want to come and talk to me on air, go to live.naturalphilosophy.org. Got a frog in my throat this morning. Anyways, it's going to be a really great time. So let me share my screen here. And we're going to take a look today at ether. But first, I always want to tell you about what we are. We are the Saturday Science Chats, sponsored by John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society and Dissident Science. And today, our topic is Convince Me Ether Exists. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Do I believe ether exists? I'll tell you in just a little bit what my opinion is, but of course, it's only one opinion. And I want to thank again all of you who are tuning in. It's greatly appreciated. And last week, I do apologize. We were going to air with this exact same program, but what happened is we got an opening to get a COVID vaccine, and my dad, who's 82, who hopefully will be in here to help me out here, but he is 82 and of course didn't have a vaccine yet, so we got those vaccines. From what I heard, we got the Moderna one, and the Moderna one gives you protection up to 80% for COVID-19. Of course, it mutates, but at least that's what they say in the first 2 weeks. Then you get your second one, goes over 90%. So that's good for those who want to do it. It's a free world. You can do what you want, I guess. But anyways, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, for watching this on recording. I know a lot of people watch this recorded, and it's greatly appreciated. And remember to always, when you watch this recorded or even live, go down and click on the like button and subscribe, hit the little bell, and you can even set it to get alerted when we go live. And you can do that either on the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society YouTube channel or my Dissident YouTube channel. We're heading our way to 1,000 subscribers on the CNPS website and also YouTube channel, and Dissident Science. We're heading our way to 4,000 subscribers. So again, I want to thank everybody. And if you do a super chat, obviously I will read that. Your question, if you want to put up something that will be guaranteed I put up there, you can do a super chat. What's a super chat, you say? Well, you can give them any money, I think amount of money, like $2 on the way up. And that amount of money, all that money goes to the organization, doesn't go to me. I got my own job, so I'm okay, but that goes to the organization, and of course, that's greatly appreciated, and it helps pay for this, over a couple $1,000 just to have all these things that we do every week. Of course, this is where critical thinkers meet. The John Chappell Philosophy Society provides an open forum for study, debate, and presentation of serious ideas that are not commonly accepted in mainstream science. We use the term natural philosophy in its broader sense, which includes physics, cosmology, mathematics, and philosophy of science. Our goal is to return to the basics where things went wrong and start anew. I think that's from our website. So our mission is to be an organization above all that promotes critical thinking without malice. And that is, you can say, hey, Big Bang's wrong, and we will not, call you stupid or crackpot, because we are all free thinkers and have the ability to think on our own, although not a whole lot of people do. It's sad. To be an organization that supports and publishes and promotes serious work outside mainstream, to provide a forum debate for topics in physics, cosmology, philosophy, and mathematics, and to provide a forum for presenting serious papers and theories without fear of censorship, and to be run and controlled entirely by our membership. And of course, who we are open to challenging mainstream science. We allow and encourage competing ideas or models. What? The universe is only one way. No, folks, the universe is not only one way. Well, the universe is the universe. That's true. Wait. Step back. The universe is the universe. There's only one of them. And we have many different ideas about how that would work, or models. We do follow the scientific method. I think there's a lot of people say, oh, you guys throw everything out for your models and, of course, scientific method, and that's baloney. We consider an idea without accepting it. So, we listen to 2,000 years of Aristotle saying that, and that's the way you should be. So if somebody comes on with a new idea, a new theory, a new whatever, you should try to consider it. And that's one of our problems. Give the voice to the voiceless, and this is where science advances. It doesn't happen outside the mainstream. So if you want to see where science is going, then this is the place. Who we are not. We don't have a specific point of view as an organization. We're a general science organization. We're not a general science organization. We don't look at all science. We look at, there's so many big problems in physics and cosmology. They're huge. They're enormous. They're gargantuan, and we're going against billions and billions of dollars and lots of egos and people who think they're so smart. So we're not a general science organization. We go after physics and cosmology because we know fundamentally there's some big problems. And we're not New Age, we're not conspiracy or UFO, and we stick to the foundation of science like gravity fields, magnetism, tectonics, math, etc., etc., etc. So our websites, you can go visit us at Science Woke. It's an online magazine for critical thinkers. We're looking maybe to get a new name, but of course that takes some time. So this year we're going to look to maybe rebrand it because linguistics people usurp words. I know because I'm a linguist. I got a master's in linguistics, and my job for 30 years is getting computers to understand language. So I think about language and words and what they mean. I think woke is a fine word myself. Unfortunately, people take it when the woke. What happened? You want to get to a short story on woke? Woke was a word that said, "Oh, people are critical thinkers and their eyes are open." The people in power who didn't like that purposely made that into a bad word, so that now we fight each other. It's terrible, but I think it's totally fine. But connotations come and go, and they change. But people weaponize that word for political reasons, and it's stupid. Naturalphilosophy.org is a critical thinking community. Go on there. You can, in fact, join in conversations. You can register, and you can also pay some help us support the organization. And we also have a Wikipedia with over 10,000 pages. Yes, 10,000 pages in Natural Philosophy Wikipedia. It's closed to the public. Why? Because if we open it up, they'd all tell us all these things aren't what we think. That's not what the consensus of the human race is. And of course, the consensus of the human race is never the new stuff. It's never the new ideas. It's never the people who are pushing science forward. So again, I did talk about this already. And you can become a member. We have monthly members of $5, $10, $25, $50. It is automatically taken out of your bank account or from your credit card. We have a membership plugin for WordPress. That's how we do it. And we have annual memberships of $35 if you're a senior, $50, $100, $250, $500. And of course, we accept donations. And I do want to thank everybody. Every month, when the month rolls around, the beginning of this month, I see the automatic payments. We got numbers of people at the bronze level, $5 a month. It's not much to give to help this organization and critical thinkers going. And we do have people who opt for the annual. And we do also have people who give donations. It is greatly appreciated, and we really want to thank everybody for their donations. And of course, I'd like to thank these people specifically for their patronage, because they are patrons, and they have donated a good amount of money, and I want to thank them. Dr. Cynthia Whitney, of course, who is our chief research scientist from the CMPS, PhD in relativity from MIT. How come she thinks relativity is wrong? She got a PhD in it, for God's sakes. Maybe I can try to get her on. She is older now, but I may try to do that. Nick Percival, who is often here, he has his own channel, Nick of Time. You got to watch that. He gave a talk. If you haven't seen that, look up on our YouTube channels, either on CMPS web YouTube channel or Dissident Science. Nick, and he has been a generous patron to our organization, as well as Duncan Shaw, an anonymous person, my father, and Kurt Renshaw. And again, we have a button for donating. We do have the CNPS 2021. We're going to make an announcement this month. It's an official launch this month, and we are accepting papers. So if you want to publish in our proceedings, which we publish normally every year, you can, and just send an email to proceedings@naturalphilosophy.org. And yes, you can have published it in another place. So we're very happy to publish. And it will take place in the fall in 2021. And it will be online, and it'll be actually great fun. We plan to use both more formal presentations and Zoom and the Zoom part will be for us to sit around and discuss like we do in the regular conferences. So we hope to have a good mixture there of that. And our publishing is really going well. Between, I'd say, April and May, you're going to see 2 books come out. I don't know if the third one may perhaps, but we have, of all 3 books we're publishing this year, 2 are ready to publish. One just happened, ready to publish in the final version from George Coyne, Notfinity, Matter in Motion. I think he's changed that title again. But regardless, that's okay. It's about consciousness and the Big Bang. No, it's not about how the Big Bang's good. It's how it's a bad idea, bad theory. He argues that very extensively. Also ready to publish a book just called Aether. It's over 400 pages. The person's pen name is Ramsey. That, after many years, I'm talking about many years, asked my father. He is the book boss on that, as we call, putting it together we use Overleaf, and anybody here who wants to use Overleaf, it's a way to put your papers and or book into book format that you then can go to PDF, but it's used by everyone who does publishing around the world. So we have that as a bonus for your membership. So if you do have a membership with organization CMPS, you can in fact use overleaf.com, I think it is, and be able to publish. In fact, that's what we use to publish our proceedings. And we also are out to our first reviewers. My father and I sent our Principia Mathematica 2 book. The title is A Complete Tool for Hacking the Physical Universe, and we have that out to 2 people. We are not asking for reviews, so all those people who want to grab the book and see, oh, what are these guys doing? It's got to be all wrong. That's going to happen on its own. What we're trying to do is get people. We have 2 sets of readers. One, our first 2 preliminary readers, we're going to then have them because they are subscribers, and they like our model. So it's good to have people like that. Excuse me, and I'm sorry. This morning my throat is not good. I usually have a booming voice here, but anyways, we do have that out to 2 people. Once that's done, we're going to do the corrections. And we have a second group, and that second group is really not, again, for review. They're going to help us with the readability, both in the words, the concepts, and the diagrams. And then after that, we will publish it. But we will be using KDP, that's the Kindle Digital Publishing, and that will, of course, be available on Amazon in both ebook form and paperback. I tell you, I don't have Alzheimer's, do I? I'm 61 only. Anyways, we're very excited. So if you're interested, and if you have a book, or even you have papers to put together, we can help you with that if you like to do so. We do have a sort of format we use. This is sort of our format for our covers. This cover needs to be changed. Got to put a photo in the back, etc. There's a cover for my dad and I's book. No photos in the back. We put them inside. But anyways, if you are interested, that's what we have. And, play coming attractions. Let's make sure I get this right. You saw that right. We've got James Maxlow coming back as well, but we've got lots of people here, which is great. We've got Phil Borker coming up. He's going to talk about his finite theory. Oh, it's all wrong. No, folks, get the attitude. Please get the attitude toward what is going on and keep your mind open. That's what's most important. So Phil is going to be talking about his work. You always find work. My dad and I couldn't, our book and our ideas about how the universe worked couldn't exist if we didn't spend a lot of time reading about other people's stuff. We stand on the shoulders of people like Burkhardt and Deneau, and now we are also standing on Newton and other people. So anyways, knowing about other people, of course, disruptive rewriting the rules of physics, that'll be coming up with in May, I believe. We'll be coming up with Stephen Bryant really great guy, talking with him. And this is going to be a lot of fun. We got Dennis McCarthy. He's going to be talking about Thomas Norton Shakespeare. What? Following in the footsteps of the great people of the NPA, that was what this organization was called 20 years ago. They'd often have people outside physics and cosmology talking about critical thinking. But this is sort of a ringer, and the reason we know Dennis is because he has a great talk. Go back on our channel, look up the natural philosophy and Dennis McCarthy and expansion tectonics. He gave a great talk on flora and fauna. I may have him do that again because we've got a lot of new people now. A lot of times people can't get to all those videos. So, and of course, yep, Dr. James Maxwell is back because now I think he can start at 10 p.m. and go to bed at midnight after the session's done in Perth, Australia, I think it is. Don't get me on that. He's going to kill me. But it's on the West Coast, not the East Coast. Sydney's on the other coast. So I think that's right. And of course, Are You Next? We do have actually a couple other people have contacted me. We're looking at what they are proposing to talk about, and we'll have them on. My goal is to give people a forum and let the world judge. And we are not an organization that supports anybody's theory. We support everyone's theory. That is, of course, if they are in a way that we think are is done in use a scientific method, and no different from any other science. So, alrighty, and play today's bumper. All right, let me do that, Dave. Okay, I believe this is it. What a name. I tell you, when you throw all this stuff together, you want to press the right button. Here we go. So, yes, today is Convince Me Ether Exists. But before we go, if you're going to convince me, you got to know what I think right now, okay? And I'll tell you what I think. It may be surprising to you, all right? And that is where I am on Ether. And Ether theory could be correct. I think that's the biggest difference between me and all the people who are etherists. You don't hear, I know of one person only. And I know a lot of etherists. One person only who's an etherist. I'm saying this to you, everybody. In fact, I'm going to put this right. I'm saying it to all of you. I only know one of you. And it's nobody who's ever on here that says ether could be wrong. Everybody who's an etherist, for some reason, thinks that ether is right. So, anyways, I am a person who thinks about this every day. So whether ether is right or our particle model is right. So to me also, I think it's very confusing because people usurp ether for everything. Oh, there's an ether in the universe. Franklin, I know you say this. Oh, you and your dad's, just get over it. You're an ether theory. No. Ethers are waves in a medium, and we have to start understanding that. It's one of the problems with ether. We always are saying, oh, anything that fills the universe is ether. No, what it is, here's what you want me to give you the brutal, see this? This is science, please. This is science, please. You see this? And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to give you the brutal truth. It's the ether is something that people want to they want it so badly that they're going to call anything and everything ether they can. They're going to try to get the mainstream to believe in ether. They're going to say, oh, Dave, you're going to go to ether. Oh, Glenn Borkert said to me on camera, and he and I can debate. We're good. We're allowed to debate. This is just debating. He says, David, you'll come around, meaning I'll come to ether. It seems like everybody, instead of looking at it critically, ether, it seems like ether's job is to say how they make everything that it's ether. It's ether. That's what it is. I'm sorry, but that's what I see. And it comes from the fact I don't say ether. Person, when I first talk about my dad and I's theory, he goes, "Well, this is what we think it is. Could it be right? It could be totally wrong." I mean, that's the right attitude to have, because it is wrong. Every theory is wrong. Every model is wrong. So admit it. If you go up there and you are just so fixated with it. So anyways, this is where I am. Waves in a medium. That's what ether. That's how ether works. And we're going to watch a video about that. Okay? Gravitons are not ether. Even though, yes, I know you have Newton, and he had this luminiferous ether light, and they talk about gravity. But the problem is we have to get we can't just say everything is an ether. We have to have some types of definition. And in my way, my idea is ether is our waves in the medium. Glenn Borker, I'm pretty sure, thinks that. Most people, and Jeff Yee, I'm sure, thinks that as well. But gravitons are not ether. And in fact, the gravitonic model isn't an ether model, in my opinion. And did Newton at his time know the difference between the two? They didn't know. So people read into it. Einstein talks about ether. So it seems that what I see with ether people is they're always saying how, Einstein loves it. Newton loves it. When they talk about space-time, that's really an ether. Guys, that's not the way to go about anything in science. Science is not it's not politics. And that's one of the things that bugs me. Like I said, I know one person who's an etherist who said, ether may be not the right answer. I know. The wrath is coming at me. Bring it on. Bring it on. Anyways, the particle model theory could be correct. What we have could be. Waves of particles, that's how we do light. They all travel together like waves of bombers. And no, it's not a photonic model. And no, it's not an ether model. It's not. And if we think in our profession, in our area that we all love to think about, I mean, we're all critical thinkers, hopefully, and we're all thinking about all this, we have to start identifying and talking with the same words. If the rule is in science that this word that I have can mean anything, who cares then? What do those words mean? I mean, what does that mean? What does a word mean? If we can't understand that what ether is, which is a medium which waves are transmitted through collisions, I don't know. And the photon model, the particle model, we hear this all the time. A photon model has photons. It doesn't have waves of particles. It's not the same. Photons, a photonic model, for instance, Newton. He had bigger ones and smaller ones, and somehow they carried frequency. As my dad says, you look at mainstream talking about it, you got this sort of like package, and in this package it's carrying frequency in it and all that stuff. And of course, etherists are going, yeah, that's right. There's a reason for ether. Well, there's another model. So where I am, ether could be correct. I am not convinced that it can't be. If you ask my opinion, as David de Hilster's gut reaction, I've known about ether for 30, 40 years, and it just, nothing when I'm like a light bulb in my head, like, and I've had other things happen. So in my aha moments, ether isn't one of them. Never has been. Where my dad's model of light, that was. Of course, this is me and my opinion. So it's not, could the particle model be all wrong? Yeah. Could the ether model be all wrong? Yeah. Could the ether model be right? Yeah. Could the particle model be right? Yeah. Could both of them be right? I don't think so, because they're very different. But that's not for us to decide. Okay, what is ether? We're going to run this video on it, ether. And I like this one a lot. In fact, it's got 60,000 views on Jeff Yee. I'm jealous. I have view count envy. Because, it's important, being a YouTuber. And it's not whether or not you're a good person and you're a good critical thinker and people enjoy talking with you. It's how many clicks you get. I'm kidding. I'm being totally sarcastic, of course. But Jeff Yee puts together these great videos. I'm a super fan. I love his model. And it's an etheric model. We sort of go at it a little bit about what it really is, but I thought he put together a good video. We're going to watch it. I need you people in the green room or in the chat, if you can please let me know to make sure you can hear this. I hate having it be showing up. So anyways, let me get that up there. And here we go. You guys hearing that? They're not hearing it. Okay, good. See, that's what we need. So I'm going to remove this from the stream. Stop the screen share. I'm going to share again because when you're sitting here doing these things, and I may just, let me see if I can do this. Okay. All right. I think I've got it now. So I'm going to share the screen. I heard it. Share audio. Let's try one more time. If it doesn't work this way, I'll go to YouTube, folks.
And you can actually more specifically call it what is the ether. And if we go back to early times, early Greek times, the word comes from Greek mythology, where it was the essence, the air that the gods were breathing. Anyway, Plato and Aristotle used it as they defined the elements, at that time 4 elements. Medieval philosophers continue to use this idea of the ether as a 5th element, and they associated it with the motion of planets, moving around space, and space includes an ether with a known density. By 1687, Sir Isaac Newton published his famous works on gravity, and he used the ether as the medium for explaining how gravity worked. Now, Newton also did a lot of work on light, which has known wave properties, and he used the ether, again, as the medium for moving waves. But a few centuries later, an experiment was conducted by Michelson and Morley to detect an ether, and the experiment used something called an interferometer. Now, the bummer part about it is it failed to detect an ether. And further experiments, even beyond Michelson and Morley, which also used interferometers to be able to detect an ether, also failed. So it showed there was nothing wrong with the experiment or the apparatus that Michelson and Morley were using. It just said, hey, there's no ether. Which meant by the 1900s, physicists had to conclude that the ether did not exist, and they built particle physics theories without it. But if there's only empty space in the universe, and light has known wave properties, the question is, what is waving? The answer in physics is, all right, light is a particle, it's a photon. But that still is problematic because in that photon, there are still wavelengths that describe light and other types of waves. Light has different colors, red versus blue are different wavelengths. So still, even in a photon, something has to describe what causes those different waves and wavelengths. And every other known wave has a medium. A medium is a substance which allows the wave to travel. A sound wave travels through air, a water wave travels through water, an earthquake, a seismic wave travels through earth, the material of earth. We'll get into a little bit more detail here. The water wave is the motion of water molecules, literally H2O molecules. It's a vibrational pattern. And a sound wave is the motion of air molecules. Air is the medium in this case. And so if every other wave has a medium, we have to ask again, does the ether exist? And if it does exist, why was it not detected in experiments, including the Michelson-Morley experiment? And the explanation starts with this. Right? Shortly after the Michelson-Morley experiment, Hendrik Lorentz suggested that the experiment, the interferometer, failed to consider length contraction. By the way, this is a Nobel Prize winner, and the Lorentz factor later was used by Einstein in relativity, and it can explain length contraction. Now, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it would have been difficult to build an experiment that considers length contraction, but computer simulations now are able to do it. And what we see here on the left is exactly what Michelson-Morley witnessed. There was no phase detection in the wave, in the light wave for the splitter there. But if you consider a interferometer that is in motion, you do see that phase detection as a result of length contraction. And remember, the Earth is always moving. It's the cause of length contraction is that not only is the Earth spinning, but it's also going around the sun, it's going around the galaxy, but more importantly, it's moving at a very fast velocity in the universe relative to other galaxies. And while that doesn't prove an ether, it could explain why it was failed to be detected. But this is the reason why I am so passionate about the ether, is this simple equation. This simple equation in energy wave theory calculates particle energies, calculates forces, but without it, without that one symbol that you see there that is highlighted, everything fails. There are no calculations. It is not possible. And that symbol is a density property. And density implies waves that are traveling in a medium. It's a given mass per volume unit. So perhaps there is an ether. If the ether does exist, here's the strange thing about it. More than a century of particle physics has been built on a missing but extremely critical property of the universe. And even this man, Einstein, he was not opposed to the ether. In fact, he's quoted on a handful of times saying that the ether could exist.
Okay, that was very good. And I guess he does say, which is really good, he does say, in fact, that if ether exists, which is really good. I do respect very much Jeff Yee and his work. There's only one thing that I think he gets wrong in this, but I'm going to talk a little bit more before we get into discussions. I totally disagree with his says, oh, air and water and wave, everything we know that is a wave goes through a medium. Not true. You have a real problem, all of you. If you believe that, then you must turn off your computer. You must not look at anything you're doing right now and tell the world that nothing exists, because in the computer world, because guess what? We're sending waves of particles that are not waves in a medium through digital, in a digital way, which is very much what my father came up with, a medium of light. So, for the answer to the question that waves, well, let me get to it. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to say that that's a huge disagreement I have with him. But again, kudos for him. Hats off. Physics Police gives him an A+ for saying if it exists. He's got the right attitude. Okay, so let's take a look at. Here we go. Here are the ether theories in Wikipedia. Ether theories, ether drag hypothesis, Einstein ether theory, etherical force, hammer experiment, all these things, Lesage theory of gravity. I do not include that as an ether. I think that's totally different in my opinion. Being confused is part of history. Luminiferous ether, the Lorentz ether theory, light dragging effects. Anyways, let's take a look at some other things here. Luminiferous ether, of course, is this idea that there's this ether out there and we move through it. It's a postulated medium for the propagation of light. The ether hypothesis was the topic of considerable debate throughout its history. You notice it's talking about it in the as if it's already not, it's not accepted. It was a historical thing, and it required the existence of invisible and infinite material that with no interaction with physical objects. Yeah, these are from, I believe, Wikipedia. I don't have to agree with a lot of this. But the idea, again, as you can see here, is there's this ether, we're moving through it, and there's like points of reference and all that. And then you get into all the problems with relativity and, how are we moving? Is the ether moving? How fast is the ether moving? Because like Jeff said, we're moving around the sun's moving around the galaxies, the galaxies are flying through space. What's ether's relationship to it? Where's the real reference frame? And that's always been a problem even with me. But anyways, that's what one of the things for those people who don't know a lot about the ether. Of course, there's a negative outcome suggested that ether doesn't exist, but of course we already had that. I put that video in because I thought it was a lot easier. General relativity, actually a theory, let's say, we may say, according to general relativity theory of relativity space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. And again, this whole idea that relativity has an ether because you have space-time and it bends. Of course, if you have something bending, it's got to have physical property. So general relativity is often considered there to be related to some type of ether. Quantum mechanics can be used to describe space-time as being non-empty at extremely small scales, fluctuating generally particle pairs that appear and disappear incredibly quickly. This again, the idea is there's something there, and those come and go. That's just another idea that people have. I think I looked this up on Wikipedia as well. So there's still a lot of people talking about this, and of course this mechanical gravitational ether. Again, I don't like that because it's like saying rocks and oranges are the same, and to me they're not at all, because mechanically if you look at ether, and mechanically if you look like at a gravitonic model with gravitons where you have particles just moving in space in all different directions, that's very different from a transmission. And again, I think that this all comes down to the wave particle duality, people that can't make up their mind, etc., etc. It comes down to we don't have a model for any of this that we all can agree upon. There's some conjectures and proposals. This is under ether, according to ether and Dirac and Bell and all that, and Newton's and other theories. There might be a medium with physical properties. That's great. They get an A+ for might be, a lot better than, unfortunately, I believe the dissonant community, who is just, I don't hear that enough. You can argue for it, and you can be right. I told you, it can be right. But we got to stop this like we're totally certain. Why do you think people run away from us? You got to say, well, we think this is a model. I think ether is a good model. Here's why. Okay, Albert Einstein said, of course, according to general relativity, blah, 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 ether according to general relativity. So, I mean, he also did this. It's sort of repeating. John Bell in 1986 interviewed Paul Davies, and The Ghost in the Atom has suggested ether theory might help resolve the EPR paradox by... As Alexander Unserker says, these people are putting arbitrary packages together with arbitrary attributes and then fighting over what attributes and packages exist. And the universe is like, it doesn't care about that. Anyways, the modern theories, again, they're all Newtonian. They all try to describe light. The new ones say there's no charge. They all have ether. There's one. It doesn't. And I know that Yonel Denou, who says that magnetic fields are swirling, he says swirling ether. We just say swirling particles. We do talk about that, where ether people do talk about that, and gravity and electricity, quantum level, etc. Oh, that's in there twice. There is a dissident database by Jean de Clément. I'm terrible at French, but in that database, which is, I guess, in a book published, I looked up Aether, and you can see there's quite a few people who have Aether. I think he has cataloged about 6,000 people, and he has energy Aether, fluid Aether Descartes, fluid Aether Lesage, Newton, fluid Aether Yarkowski, fluid Aether Fractal Universe. Oh, that's not it. I'm looking at the Aether. Math Aether, plasma Aether, solid Aether Lorenz, superfluid Aether, two fluids Aether. So you can see there's quite a lot of dissidents out there who actually believe in Aether, and he spells it with E-T-H-E-R, which of course is unfortunate because we do actually have something in the real world that you can point to and hold in your hand, and at least in a bottle form, an Aether. So here it is. Sorry, I put that, now it's bigger so you can take a look at it. Ritz ballistic theory. Oh yeah, I remember that one. Anyways, here's the problem with etherists, and I've already told you this. Incapable of admitting there are other plausible models. I now know two people. I know Jeff said that it is, but the certainty is annoying. Okay, to put it nicely. Ignore all the problems with Aether. If you were to take all of you ethers today from the CMPS, and we were to go back in time, which is impossible. No, it's not possible. But if we could get all the people from the MPA 20 years ago to sit in a room with you, they would come up with problem after problem after problem with the Aether model. And what has happened is that these problems that they knew about and talked about a lot have disappeared into, excuse my language, the ether, and instead of us addressing them today, we don't. Somebody does. One of them do, and that's Borker, because Borker's been around that time. He knew, and he was fighting for the ether. So he's tried to resolve these problems. The size of the ether he has, the shape of the ether he has, to specifically combat the problem of transmission through collision, and then also transverse waves, like, something like even like a laser. So it's just like doesn't exist, which is, oh man, I wish I could bring these people back. Most of them are gone. But anyways, for some unexplained reasons, etherists all try to explain gravity with ether. And not only that, everything else with ether. It's like, I call it the cockroach that ate Cincinnati. It's like from an old movie or something like that. And the idea is, ether. No one knows, we don't think it exists, but it does. And it describes everything. It can make a toothpaste out of it. You can make gravity out of it. You can make magnetic fields out of it. You can do anything out of it. And that's what they try to do. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I try to understand, why is it that you must explain gravity and light with the same thing? Why? In our model, it's all particles. It's just the way the particles move. But I don't get that. And I see what we see today is like lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people spending lots and lots and lots of time trying to make an ether, which is ether to me came from light. That's the idea. Yes, the ether that was out there. But people, when I look at it, it's a way that light is the unexplained thing. And people, when they first start out, this is interesting. Name a person that you know that's an etherist that started out with gravity. It's always the other way around. So the idea is ether will explain everything. Everything's made out of ether. Okay? I don't like that. It doesn't make sense. That why? I mean, if you can show it to me that you can, is not that it is. The question is that the best way to do it? And also fix it on a subset of problems. Etherists are constantly worried about Michelson Morley. You saw that. The null ether. Well, first of all, you have to believe in the ether the way the etherists did in the 19th century, folks. Ether is can be in many different forms. It's in the universe. You've got the ether that sort of gets, when it's closer to mass, there's more of it, like Borkert, entrained ether. Lots of people have the entrained ether. So, and transverse waves. So that one they should be fixated more. Actually, that's a good one to be fixated on. Problems with ether. Sight and light are extremely important. And I think that's why people are so fixated on ether. Like Jeff Yee says, every wave that we know about is through a medium. And so because light gives us more information about the universe for we humans and animals, then it's extremely important. So then ether becomes extremely important. And we can't get the water and sound waves out of our mind. We can't think that, we do send waves of particles through fiber optics, and it comes back to me and we use that to get information, and we can describe waves perfectly fine with that. That's another model. This is my dad's model. And I'm not here to say that's right or wrong, but there's another model. It doesn't matter if it's right. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. It matters that there is another one. And if you're an etherist, you got to think in mind. If I were an etherist, I'd be thinking, well, maybe the de Hilster model with David and Bob is right. That's what I think, because I think the same thing about ether. It can be right. I will say it again. And our intuition can be wrong. That's what I'm talking about. Light can only be waves in a medium. No, there are other ways. Any of us have an intuition that ether is a medium for light There's many of us, including me. It just never hit me. It was not something that I gravitated for. In fact, I looked in the chat, and I do see people in the chat who are not etherists. So we're out there. We're not out here, and I think it's a great debate. I really do. But I think ether right now is shooting itself in the foot because we've fallen in love with ether way too much, in my opinion. Problem with ether. And this is my list, not the list from the MPA. Transmission of light for billions of light years through collision. Think about it. You've got a medium, and this is one of the things people call the density or the elasticity. You've got to transmit a wave 10 billion light years for 10 billion years. You've got to have collisions through the universe, and it's got to come to my eye. Okay? And that's different from like what a photon model or a particle model like we have, which is they got to just get here. They'll get here, traveling through space. But how? It's not an efficient way to transmit information. Here's what I tell people when I look at in this. Again, this is me, David de Hilster, talking about it. Go into a room that holds 1,000 people. Okay? Now have them all start to talk. I dare you to be able to come up with a way to listen to every one of those conversations with high fidelity. Now we're talking about when you look around, the fidelity of light is absolutely extraordinary. And if you look at waves, multiple waves in a pond, you look at multiple waves, you look at sound. You get too many people talking, the sound waves collide on each other, and it's mush. How is that going to go 10 billion light years? These are David de Hilster's questions. And of course, transverse laser light. Okay, yes, you shine a laser at the moon. It goes from a small beam about that big to about, I think it's 6 kilometers wide. That's still pretty sharp. Can you do that in a medium? Yeah, you can get, like you said, you can make arbitrary packages with arbitrary attributes and then perhaps explain it. Maybe someone can. And of course, you have the double slit with a single photon electron acting like a wave. You have a person from the NPA who's a friend of mine who's reading our book right now, Luis Sarabon from Brazil, from Niterói in Brazil. He presented to our NPA a paper on how he could show the double slit could be done with particles. Okay. So, oh, that's the end of the slideshow. And I am back. And I'm sure I should just probably leave because people are hating my guts. But I don't know. My dad is there. Dad, if you can get any questions up there, he's curating hopefully some of these. If you have a question, the way we try to do it is to put up. No one's come on to me. Here we go. If you could in the chat put question : or comment : and you can put that up. We'll put that up and discuss it. And if you're in the green room, here's what the rule. I'm going to be very good. Here's the rule. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to tear you apart. I'm going to let you talk about why you want to convince me that ether exists. And again, I am not here because I don't believe it and you guys are all wrong. I will say to you again, and I am being brutally honest. My dad and I are writing a book. We have a totally different model, but it is a fact that I think about it every day, that I think about ether. Is there some of the things that in our particle model that would clue us in we could use and say, well, maybe it's not the particle model, maybe it's not the wave, the lights as a wave in the ether. I mean, in our way, but it's ether. So I think about this every day. So I'm not, how do you say, 100% convinced, even though my father and I have another model. It says, Kevin Kahn, your model isn't a wave. Hey, Dad, you want to answer that question? I'm going to bring him up. Here we go. Hey. You're there.
This is a wave.
Oh, come on. All right.
No.
You've just, half the viewers just left. I've got a count at the top. They're all leaving. Don't do that, Dad. Okay, maybe you want to answer about that real quick.
When I look at the total of a wave signal, I don't have it set on. Is that okay?
It's okay. It's not the best.
Mike, make sure to turn off the video thing.
Hello?
Oh, well, that's my fault, Dad. You're right. Man, I applaud you. Oops. Let's see. Okay, I think, hold on. There we go. Okay, we got it now. Okay, is that better? And thank you very much, Franklin. He's my savior. Franklin's a great guy.
Anyway, when as a circuit design engineer, I've looked at a lot of signals, waves, electrical waves. And when I do that, you look at it, it has a peak, and there is a spacing between the peaks. And the wave can be a nice, pretty sine wave, or it can be pretty ugly. But still, it has peaks. It has a valley where there is in most cases, they say negative signal, but it could be no signal, and a spacing between it. Well, that's what the particle model is in the thing that Dave and I are proposing. It has a group of particles that represent a peak, maybe 10 clustered together, and then maybe none, and then 10 again, and there's spacing between it. And so you have a peak, and you have a gap, and you have another peak, so you end up with a wavelength. You end up with them traveling at speed c. And when you detect that on a scope, the way I just described it would be an impulse, not a sine wave. A peak, then nothing. A peak and nothing. That's a bunch of peaks, not a sine wave. For a sine wave, you have to have 10, then 9, then 8, then 7, then 0. Never goes negative, and goes back up to 10. Nice, in a nice progression with a number. These are all in line, and they have a peak. And if you detect that with a photo detector, it's going to cause the resistance of the photo detector to generate a voltage across it, giving you that same sine wave that I see on the scope.
Okay, so I think the answer to this question, Dad, I think I have the answer. The answer is a wave has to have a wavelength, and it has to have a frequency, right? So to say that our model is not a wave is not true, because waves have to have, and again, I'm not arguing for our model. The question is, what is really a wave? I look at it as a general thing. A wave has to have a wavelength and frequency. That's it. I mean, and no matter what your model is, it's got to have that. Our model has that, so yeah, it's a wave. So, okay, thank you, Dad. We get some more other questions. Comment, here we go. I'm just going to grab some too. It says, John House, how does the particle model achieve coherence? Well, we talk about that in book. It depends on what you mean by coherence. I've heard two versions of what coherence is, so you'd have to come up with, ask about that. Okay. Dad, I'm going to go backwards on these. If you can go backwards on these and put them up there for it. I think we have some things that have questions and comments there. We'll go backwards from time. I see one there. I'm going to put it up, Dad. It's oh, there it is. Comment. Okay, we already have that. But the next one I'm going to do, I found it myself, Dad. I'm going to put it up there. Rotate Michelson-Morley experiment vertically. I think somebody has done that. Does anybody know in the green room or in the chat? Is that something that has been done? I don't know. I'm not sure if that would change much at all. But again, I think we're sort of fixated on that. I don't know the answer to that. Let's see. Question: is action at a distance possible? Why or why not? If you mean you don't have physical contact and have some action at a distance, here's what I can say to you about that is the models, what I call the modern models, they're all Newtonian based. They're all not believing in spooky action at a distance. They believe in Newtonian physics. So what that means is for something to have an action upon it, there has to be something causing that action. Now, I think the problem is the spooky action at a distance comes through when you're talking about the double slit experiment, where they get into philosophy that's just absolutely ridiculous, which is when they are looking at they're putting light through a double slit or even a single slit, and they get a diffraction with it. They also get dispersion if you use sunlight. And then at that point, they're saying, well, then they try one photon, what they consider to be one photon or one electron, which and if you ask me, it's not one. They never have one. They're actually sending a lot more than one. They think they are. And that goes through the slit. Then they can detect which one it goes through. And somehow the answer to that has led to this absurd question of action at a distance. So the idea is this, I believe, came from when they have an explanation of an electron. There are some videos up there on YouTube where I saw electron as this little blob. It hits the double slit. It literally, the blob is like sending a blob, and it's like a water bubble in zero gravity through a slit, and it sort of breaks up and then goes out, and then they say, oh, it went through this slit this time, and it went through this slit, and when they measure it going through one slit or the other, they say if you turn the detector on, then it doesn't act like a wave anymore. So they get super confused. They think they're sending one particle. They're probably not. And then they start making all these philosophical statements, including the comment, which was action at a distance. So action at a distance to me is the problem of not having any model at all. And they're all just guessing. And instead of saying the model, we don't know, we can't conjecture and make philosophical statements like action at a distance, they go and do it. They have history erasing experiments that literally say, oh, you don't want to know. This whole double slit and a particle going through and being in two places at once is completely us accepting what we see is bizarre and then giving it bizarre explanations like it's magic. And it isn't science. I know a lot of people agree with me on that, but I mean, that's what I would say at Action at a Distance. It's just a stupid philosophical conclusion for people who don't know or don't have a model for any of this stuff. I mean, to put it again, in the double slit experiment, as the photonic expert from the University of Connecticut told us, after 35 years of working with light, we have no idea how light is emitted. It travels through space. We have no idea how it travels through space. It hits a detector. We have no idea how that happens. And then we detect it, and we have absolutely no idea that happens. Physics claims to know. This is a guy who does it all his life, doesn't know. So my goal, and a lot of the people who are out there to schools today, is to come up with a model for the universe, and the rest of it has to be explained through that model. And we're not going to have these stupid philosophical problems. Okay, we have when matter occupies space, it displaces the ether, which creates pressure difference in the ether. And the result of that is gravity. So ether is rarefied inside the Earth compared in space. You know, I probably know as many ether theories as anybody, maybe even more, because I listened to all of them. Yeah, I've heard of that. There's entrained ether. There's also flowing ether in and out. Yeah. You can come up with a system for it, but you still have to explain these problems of how does it transmit light 10 billion light years. Okay, if ether pushes on the surface of what does it know how much force to use? I don't know. The question, of course, has to do with somebody's model. That force has to be explained. One of the things my father does ask is, where does the force for these movements come from? Okay, so you have, let's say, a vibrating atom. It vibrates the ether, and that ether then sends out the waves. So, you know, if ether pushes on the surface, again, that's sort of a graviton ether model together, which I guess is really popular. Again, that's one way to look at it. I guess my question to you is, why does ether have to explain gravity? You know, is it because I believe in ether and I want it to explain everything? That's not a good answer. So if somebody out there who has an ether, who I'm just convince me, tell me why gravity has to be etheric. You know, I think part of it comes from us reading Newton, right? He talks about ether, what I call luminic, you know, well, I can't say that, but luminiferous ether versus, you know, gravitic ether. Doesn't really know. Smartly says, I have no model for this. Smart guy. And we're still fighting about it all this time. Let's see. We got people. All right. Anyways, somebody come up, and I know Franklin. I know Ian, I think, is an etherist. Franklin, you're an etherist. And, you know, I have no problem. I will give you a platform. I won't get in your way. You want to talk about it a little bit. But here's what I would say is, I mean, it's interesting to talk about how an ether theory may work. I'm not interested in that today. I'm interested in knowing why ether has to be it. So I guess, and if, of course, if that doesn't work, then we'll talk about what your ether does. But why does it have to be ether? So, and anyways, I probably scared everybody away now. or you can talk about your ether. All right. Hey there. There he is. Saves my butt every time with audio. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, this is Franklin Hugh. Of course, lots of you do know him. He was in charge of our videos conferences for many years, which can be a lot. And you are an etherist, correct, Franklin?
That's right. I'm a rabid etherist.
Yes, he is. You can tell. But one thing I do.
At the mouth.
Yeah, one thing I do like about your attitude in general is you don't go, you know, totally ballistic on things. You seem to have a pretty even head. Not only that, you do listen to other people quite a bit as well. So
I tell you about, you know, I've been, you know, draft science.
Right. Yeah.
So I've been having a debate with him. You know, I think
you can debate him.
Yeah, I think he's much more into your camp. where we were discussing the nature of radio waves. So I think like you, he thinks that, it's a particle. So I likened it to like throwing a rock against a wall or something. So it's that's the way you get the frequency. That he was just saying that the only thing that really counts is the frequency. So if I have a 10 hertz signal, then I'm just throwing the rock 10 times per second kind of thing. I mean, I think that's kind of what you and your father are kind of saying.
Yes, it is, and I did have debates with him. I stopped because he's totally incapable of being, how do you say, civil. But I sort of question it, because the only time I heard him ever talk about it was after I talked about him to him about what we did. So I'm sure he claims to have thought of something like that, but I'm aware.
You would have agreed.
Yeah, it's close. It's close together. Yeah. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? That's the question. But you're absolutely right.
The analogy he brings up is like, if you have a string of dominoes, and there's two ways that energy can get from one side of the domino to the other. It's either that, well, you knock the domino down and the whole string of dominoes had to go to get to the other side, or you just took the domino, you threw it to the other side, and that's the other way to get the energy over.
Yeah, that is right. And so he is more in our camp for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but as an etherist, I just feel that it's more practical to have the dominoes go through, so that the domino from the one side is not actually the domino on the other side, right? Because that is what you would be claiming in a particle model, is saying a radio transmitter, that the transmitter is actually sending a particular identifiable particle all the way to the transmitter, and then it hits the transmitter, and that's how we get the signal. So that's one thing to make clear about what the difference is there.
Right. So for and again, this is a civil debate. My problem is the opposite, and that is, how can you ever imagine that collision, which in my opinion is a very how do you say, the universe shows it's a very, how do you say, it's not a great method in which to send information long distances. That is, for 10 billion years, for a collision to happen for 10 billion years through an innumerable amount of particles to travel to 10 billion, I can see particles lasting 10 billion years pretty easily, and having them travel through space, because most of space is space. Even through atoms, there's mostly space. So I have the opposite view. So how would you, as an etherist, convince a person like me that collisions can happen, like you said, and they can happen for 10 billion years, and what kind of properties would that be? That seems pretty, how do you say, if I were designing it, I wouldn't do it that way.
Yeah, there's no way I can prove that a wave can go 10 billion miles.
10 billion, no wait, 10 billion light years.
10 billion light years. Yeah.
That's further.
There's no physical evidence I can point to say that that's particularly possible. The only analogy that I use in that thing is, like, suppose you're in a swimming pool and you're trying to get a signal from one side to the other. And so one way I can try and do it is by, using a squirt gun full of red dye. I can squirt it into the pool and see whether it can get to the other side of the Olympic swimming pool. And because if it's a particle, that the dye has to physically get from one side of the pool to the other. And probably you figure, no, it's not really going to do that. It's going to get totally lost in the swimming pool, although it's already biased towards an ether, I admit. But if you put a speaker in one side of the swimming pool and you loudspeaker underwater and you play that, then I think you would actually very easily be able to receive the signal on the other side, because the particle doesn't have to travel all the way, doesn't have to swim all the way across the pool to get to the other side. So as an etherist, I would kind of point to that analogy for, why is it a signal can be a long transmissible, because the particle does not actually have to go from point A to point B. Only the pressure wave has to go from point A to point B, which is actually easier, I think. So
Well, no, it's easier. It's okay. That's where we disagree. Mechanically, it isn't easier because what we see as, for instance, light going through space from a star that's 10 billion light years away. Space is mostly empty. There's stuff in it all over the place, yeah. And even in our model, it's infinitely down. It's traveling through there's just infinite levels of it. So yeah, but it's just like shooting an asteroid toward the middle, or a probe toward the middle of the galaxy. The chance of it going through the galaxy without hitting anything is great. And that's the way we see light, is the same way. Whereas in a pool, you have an immensely dense kind of thing. You don't have, if you're sending atoms through a dense thing of atoms, which are much more closely packed than, let's say, it's not like, that, I think your analogy doesn't work.
As an etherist, we do in fact fill space with this extremely dense substance, just like the pool of water. So what we see as, empty space, I mean, even empty space is not that empty. The density of atomic hydrogen is, not zero. But, the problem with the particle theory would be that we know how collisions work. And if your particle actually runs into just one hydrogen atom, then it will be deflected. Right now.
For sure. But your model must show that.
Just like you can't imagine how a light wave can travel a billion years, I can't imagine how a light particle could travel a billion years and not run into anything. So, one or the other. So.
Well, no, I mean, again, it's the matter of how much space there is for that particle. And I think that's the difference. So what we see is particles going through space. For instance, light, if it is one particle, a photon could be, we don't have a photonic model, but a particle that would be part of a light wave, if it goes through a room, you could have 60 million of them a second be in your room without ever seeing another particle. So if you look at the mathematics between the elasticity that's needed and the density that's needed for ether versus the space that you look at for a particle to travel 10 billion years, if you look at that mathematically, in my opinion, you're looking at physics then. You're not looking about, I can't imagine it. What I'm saying is the elasticity of ether has to be absolutely an absurd level, because eventually every collision loses energy. And for the collision to have enough energy to get all the way for 10 billion years through 10 billion light years, that elasticity has to be absolutely amazing. And to me,
absolutely amazing. People have calculated it to be something like 100 million times denser than steel.
Right.
It's a reasonable calculation, and but
so the question is, which is from the general public, not from me, is if it's 100 times denser than steel, why are we moving around as if it isn't there?
Well, as an etherist, I would say we do detect it. That's why when you try and push something the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, you get resistance, even if you're pushing on a frictionless surface. The thing is that we cannot. There is something that's holding the mass, the car, back, and that is this incredibly dense substance. So that's.
So when you send a probe like we have Voyager, and it's going to continue, most likely it's going to never hit anything for a very, very long time. Probably could leave the galaxy without hitting anything. That model isn't viable, or that's not going to happen. You don't think we can send a probe through that we're going to actually hit something?
Well, it hits something all the time, but it's like a spring.
I'm just talking about in the realm of what we know hit, okay? Because obviously, if you're infinity, it's hitting stuff all the time, yeah. But I'm just talking in the realm of what Borker would call unicosm. In our world, our level, I'm saying that probe could go all the way through the universe, all the way through the galaxy, and for a very long time before it hits anything of atomic structure that would really impede it.
Well, that might be true. I mean, we know it hits, I don't know, the interatomic hydrogen gas, I guess. That slows it down.
Yeah, okay, here's a comment here from Harry. The ether is an attempt to imagine a universal substance. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good.
that's certainly what it is, right?
Well, here's my question though too. I mean, I'm gonna. I mean, this Harry has really good comments. I like that too. But this whole idea of a universal substance sort of comes. Is that the same? I get the feeling when people talk about that, that's the same as like the ultimate particle, or the whole universe is made of this stuff. I'm just wondering, do people have that same idea?
It could be. I mean, that's, but some people like to think of it as something which is mysterious, like give it different names.
Right, but he's talking about a universal substance. And one of the things that I noticed that etherists do is that everything is made out of ether, right? The particles are made. I asked Borkert, Glenn Borkert, he's an etherist. I said, Glenn, he also says ether is super, super, super small. And the reason he does that, of course, is the problem of, transmission and fidelity, meaning, being able to see that.
Well, once
So,
again,
but
what are your
But what I'm saying is the idea here is, my question is when people say universal substance, is that also sort of the idea where people have, and this is a lot of people have this, a lot, including mainstream science. Sometimes they say it's like an onion, that is the universe, you keep peeling it, there's more layers. Other people go for that everything's made out of this. Glenn Borkert, Jeff Yee, I think is sort of like that. He's got ether and something else, but there's nothing else below it. My question is this universal substance we call ether? I get all the things about how people think that there's ether out there, and I get all the linguistic stuff, I know. But I'm saying, is this also tied with the idea that ether is a universal substance, meaning everything comes from it?
It could be. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail, to try and reduce concepts down to like the one thing. It's like I could say ether is made out of electrons, for example, right? And that the only thing that exists is electrons, right? And then that would make everything so simple, right? Because
Well, it wouldn't, because you have a problem. You have one big problem. It's called I call it the magical problem. Here's the magical problem. If the whole universe is made of one particle, it's got to organize itself. It's got to do stuff. It's got to be like group itself together. It's got to turn itself into atoms. It's got to turn all this kind of stuff. And for it to do that, just magically, you have to have properties. So what you end up with is what Alexander Unziger calls, and I say this over and over because it's a great phrase, is arbitrary packages with arbitrary attributes. The quark is a great idea, right? Here you have earth, wind, fire, and water. Then we get to the periodic table. Oh, now we have all these atoms and stuff. Oh, that's great. Oh, wait a minute. They're all made of three things: protons, neutron, electron. So somebody in the 1960s at the Woodstock was sitting around smoking a joint going, oh man, everything should be made out of one particle. I'm going to call it a quark. They made a weird name for it, and they go, everything's made out of quarks. What happens to quarks? Instantly they go from 3 to 6 to 9. They get all these attributes, and it's, again, an arbitrary package with arbitrary... the attributes are upness, downness, color, things that don't really mean color, half spin. Yeah, like so what happens, though, is if you're saying that something is made... let me finish and I'll let you go. Something is made out of one thing. It's got to be magical. It has to magically start organizing all by itself. You have no explanation. Whereas if you have an infinite world, the things below it and its movement will cause the things above it and its movements. And yeah, it's like a fractal. We'll never get there, but at least there's a mechanism always below it and above it. So this idea that everything can be out is easy maybe in our heads, but you've got to come up with arbitrary packages with arbitrary attributes like charge, and all of a sudden it attracts. And it's magical. So I'm just saying the ultimate particle is magical. And I was wondering if universal substance is going along that. The ethers does that. And then I want to ask the person, how does it organize itself?
Certainly, if there is such a fundamental substance, it would indeed be magical and probably not really explainable. That's why.
Right. Yeah.
If you're going
I can go by that.
A particle, then it should probably be one that we at least recognize. So, for example, like I said, the electron. Now, the electron is a magical particle, but we're pretty sure that thing exists, right? It's not like I made up, like, circulon or something other on or whatever on, which is what the other ethers do. I prefer to say specifically I decide to make my ether out of something you can actually recognize. So, for example, now I'm kind of altering my theory to say that the ether is actually a sea of neutrons, because we know what neutrons are, we know they exist, we can measure them. So that's easier than saying, I don't know, I'll make, I call it a positive electron because I think the neutron is a positron electron pair. But I think that that's kind of one way to get out of that problem, which is to say, well, I don't know what an electron is, but assuming we agree that those things exist, then we can.
But if you have charge, I'll go right to you right away. I understand that. I think you're right in the sense I'm happy to hear you admit, yeah, it's sort of magical. But if you have charge, right? If you have a positron, electron, and there's charge on that, well, charge is a force. If force in my world is a Newtonian, how does it get a force? Is it magical again, or?
No, it's not particularly magical.
Well, wait a minute. It's particularly
bring in the bit of
magical.
magic that we have the positron, which I claim is actually physically the same particle as an electron.
But wait, let's get back to the question. I understand what you're saying. Instead of describing your model, I want to know how you have charge and how do things move in that charge.
The way you have charge is that you have waves, you have medium. So for right now, just forget about just that you have some medium, and then you have a particle, and the particles collide into each other, and when they do, they ring. So that is a fundamental and magical property, I must admit. But everything has a resonant frequency, so it's not terribly hard to believe.
So you think so in your model is the electric field an ether, or is that something else?
The electric field is actually a wave that's being emitted by the electron.
A wave through what?
It's a wave, just like a radio wave.
A wave through what?
A wave. A wave through.
Wait. A wave through what? What?
A wave through the sea of electrons.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So you have waves and electrons. Do you have an ether?
Well, that's what it is.
Okay, so your ether's made of electrons. Okay.
But it's not strictly a sea of electrons. It's also a sea of electrons and positrons, whatever. But they're essentially the same part. They're essentially the same particle. And the curious thing is that when an electron and positron are right next to each other and there's no medium between them, there can be no attraction between those things. Mm-hmm. So in the ether itself, it's this mix of checkerboard of positrons and electrons, which basically are act neutral because there's nothing, there has to be a medium between two things in order to have a force. And if there's no medium, then there's no force. So at some point, the Coulomb's law breaks down. It must break down, right? If you get close enough, the force becomes zero. So there's no infinite force. Right.
I mean, the Coulomb force. You have to describe it, but
it's down at
right. But exactly. In which I agree 100% with you. That is, the universe has levels to which a force no longer is sort of negligible at that point, and something else is going on. Here's a comment.
The question of why does ether get into gravity theories?
Right.
Strictly, mine doesn't directly do that, but in some ways is that as a Newtonian mechanical person who only believes that things get forces on them because things collide into it, right? That's really the only way that any force can really be exerted on something. That gravity is such a force, and that must mean that there must actually be some particles or something that are impacting my body, which is causing what I feel is the force. And the only apparent source of those particles would be the unseen ether. So that's
right. No, I agree with that. I think forces cannot be something action at a distance or pluses and minuses on things, or eventually has to have a force. But here's a comment here. It says the electromagnetic spectrum is a byproduct of ether. That's the standard ether model, and so is gravity, light, inertia, and mass. Ether is ubiquitous but isotropic in presence of mass. Again, I understand that model. Again, here's what I see a lot of times. And do we have people in the green room want to come up as well? Okay, I do. I'm going to bring you down. Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for your civil discourse. And I always enjoyed talking with you. Thank you very much, Franklin. But here is, again, this is an explanation. But one of the things I'm going to bring up, Bob Gray, I saw his hand was up. Bob, you're going to be coming up next. One of the things I see, a lot of rigor, a lot of effort is involved in this. I see this, Alex Tiger. I see this, and he says gravity is a side effect. Now, I really think this is more, I look again at the linguistics of people's intentions, because we have to, my friend and I came up with a computer program. What does it do? It allows us to look at text, put the knowledge that we think people have in our head, and look at the text, process that text, and try to get what the intention of what people are saying. And I think this whole thing of gravity is a side effect is a wonderful statement. And here's what I would interpret this as a linguist. Oh, yeah, ether is the most important thing. Gravity comes from it. Yeah, there's a million ways you can do it, but it comes from it. And to me, that's like, it's nice, but you have to, first of all, say, why does it have to, which I have not heard an answer yet. The other thing is, how does it answer? And before I bring Bob Gray up, I'll give you another example, what I call the Vancouver model for ether. Those of you who know Duncan Shaw know that he has an ether model, and it's a flowing ether. There are a lot of people who have flowing ether models. And why do they have that? To explain gravity. And here's what happens. So I say there's ether, and it describes light. Okay, why am I not happy with that? Why do I now say, oh, I have to describe something else? I think it's an enthusiastic emotional response. It's like, oh, ether's great. I can describe light. Yay. And now you go, wow, what else can I do? Oh, gravity. That's another one you don't know. Oh, ether. We know it has to be light, so it's got to be there. So we're going to make a simpler model. Ether has to be part of that. And so you go, okay, that's part of it. Oh, the way gravity is sort of like a pushing force, so it's going to push. Oh, my ether's going to go. Oh, now it's got to go into bodies. If it goes into bodies, it's going to have to come out of bodies. And that's what the Vancouver theory is. And he has this elaborate mechanism how to do that. And absolutely, I'm going to tell you right now, he could be right. I don't know. He could. But to me, it seems to be that's where it comes from. Gravity is a side effect. And that side effect, oh, it can happen this way. And people are like, doesn't matter, because light, that's important. And ether exists. And I see it more of the psychology that I see of people coming through. But anyways, that's my take on that. So sorry to go on that, but I want to get people's comments up here. I'm going to bring up Bob Gray. Hey, Bob, how are you?
Fine, thanks, David. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm not hearing people talk about, for example, the superposition principle with their models of the ether,
right,
in electrodynamics and in gravity. So if I have two bodies and this body is emitting and it's whatever it's emitted is colliding with the other body to produce the force, that means something behind that is now shielded by this body. So does superposition principle hold strictly? It strictly is superposition or not? And I'm wondering per model, oh, it's a Newtonian-like model. Something's emitted and, oh, it's bouncing off like billiard balls. Or is an ether model more, it warps the space so that when I put another particle in, it just adds to that warped space so that the third body feels the sum of the two.
But it's still a collision, though, right? I mean, eventually...
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out. When considering the different ether models, the different models of force and so forth, consider explaining the superposition principle or stating that the superposition principle does not hold strictly. It's not strictly true. And I don't know if that might be a way to help filter the different theories, or if people, I don't know. Just thought I'd throw that out and see if
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is like,
superposition.
yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly, I think it's more of what I think people call the shadowing effect. Is that what you're calling superposition?
That kind of effect, yes.
Yeah,
So
basically
if I have
shadowing shadowing effect. If you have, let's say, a ping pong ball is going in all directions in space, right? If you put two things together, the ping pong ball is going to hit this side more than they're going to hit this because it's blocking it, and the tendency or those things will be pushed together. That's sort of called
particle behind it, or the next charged body behind that, is now in the shadow.
right.
So it's not the sum of the two individually, because now one is in a shadow. So superposition doesn't hold, it's not strictly true. Or is the model that whatever is transmitting the force passes through the body and therefore does not create a shadow? Or does the source warp the ether, warp that space, and you put another body in it and it just adds to the amount of warp, and therefore it is the sum of the two individually? And
Well, I
there
guess
is no shadow.
I guess the warping part, I start to lose you because I'm trying to construct the model physically in my head, and what I see in the warp part is I'm not sure I understand. I know what you're saying, but I can't come up with any real physical model to say what you're saying. I end up with collision somewhere, because what happens is if you just fill it in, if it just appears more like entrained ether, that's what it is. Burkett's entrained ether, right? You have ether particles that are just sort of around, and as you get closer to a mass, you have more ether, and that more ether then eventually causes what is in the colliding of these things, what is the shadow effect somewhat, and the gravity, I guess. I'm not really an expert on that, but I can say.
Nor I, and I'm not advocating one or the other. I would like to ask.
Wait a minute. The rule is if you come up here, you have to choose the sides, and if it's not on my side, you're a bad guy. And if you aren't, I'm kidding. Come on. I'm the one So.
But I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has any experimental evidence for the failure of the superposition principle in electrodynamics or in gravity, and therefore there is a shadowing effect. Anybody out there know of any experimental evidence one way or the other?
I don't
know.
I don't think there is, and I don't even think there are people doing the models. The only person I know doing models about that, there's only two people I know. One is Jeff Yee, who's doing a model in Blender, which is a real physical model where he's actually paying people to try to come up to verify his model's viable. The other person is my father, who did it with mathematics, which is basically just summing up all the collisions. That gravity isn't one thing. It's not a field. It's just a gajillion collisions, and no two collisions ever happen at the same time. So, but okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll bring you down. I know he didn't choose a side, so he's out. I'm kidding. Here's a comment. Ether is neutrinos to Wall Thornhill. Of course, people know that's a trigger word for me. Neutrinos. If I'm autistic with that word. And here's what I will say to you. I've heard this for gravitonic models. I've heard it for ether models. And here's my answer to you. Before you hang your hat on the neutrino, go and read about it. Because if there's any particle that particle physics has invented, which most of them are invented and don't exist, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, ask Alexander Unziker, we can throw them out from 1930. So if the particle is after 1930, neutrino was exactly then it doesn't exist, because our methods of finding what we think we're finding doesn't make any sense. The neutrinos, go to autodynamics.org, who is one of the great neutrino antagonists who showed why the neutrino was actually postulated. It was postulated because they were applying special relativity to radioactivity or decay cases, beta decay. And what they came up with? Well, they came up with exactly the energy that chemistry predicted, but because you have electrons going close to the speed of light, meaning 0.86 at the highest speed, then therefore it must have more energy than it does. We don't have it, so we have a chargeless, massless particle coming out of there, and we're going to call it the neutrino. It was supposed to be called the neutron, but at the time neutron was taken. That's the history. So if you hang your hat on a particle that doesn't exist. Sorry. And why do people do that? Is because they're trying to, again, it's an emotional thing. I want to cater to the mainstream. They all believe in neutrinos, even though they don't exist. And we had many people in our organization that know they don't exist and have, in fact, there's an experiment, the Buchner-Van de Graaff. Remember Van de Graaff? He did an experiment at MIT, I believe. I think we have it on the autodynamics.org website. It has an experiment that disproves the electron neutrino. It disproves it. You want experimental? No one looks at it. No one looks at it. Did Wall Thornhill look at the experiment in 1946 by Buchner and Van de Graaff that show that the electron neutrino does not exist? No one looks at this. This is the same way with the ether problems that people knew about the problems. They don't confront them anymore. They all died. People who died neutrino. I asked a guy once, I said, what's the origin of the neutrino? Well, it's not important, the origin. Jeez. I want to shoot me now. So the answer to ether is neutrinos to Wall Thornhill. I would say Wall Thornhill. No offense. You're hanging your theory on a particle that doesn't exist, and go do your homework on the neutrino. And willing it to not exist, closing your eyes to the Buchner-Van de Graaff experiment that clearly shows it, that can be repeated today, that shows that in fact neutrino, the electron neutrino, which is the most out of the 17 flavors of neutrinos, oh my God, it shows it isn't. So that's the answer to that. Let's see here. We'll answer this one. Your model is contrary because you said space is empty. No, it's empty at certain levels. If you look at it at certain levels, it's empty, but it's not empty. It's infinitely filled and infinitely empty. What I would suggest is reading Dr. Glenn Borkert, and you will find out that the universe is infinitely space and infinitely filled. And so, no, it's not a contradiction, but we do deal with something like there's air here, there's ether. In our model, there's levels all the way down, as in Borkert says, at particles that infinitely all the way down and all the way up. There's no smaller particle. Every particle has a part. And so, yes, it's a figure of speech. When I'm talking about sending a probe through the universe, it's going through an infinite sea of infinite particles. Yes, but those particles impacts on these have to, for instance, if the Voyager is made up of atoms, and the atoms are mostly space, we know that, and your particle is so darn small, the chances of that particle interacting with that Voyager, even though there's cajillions of them, an innumerable amount of them, it won't interact. So that's very possible. So that's what I would say. Not a contradiction. I was talking about, again, if you send a ether particle at this level, that those impacts are very negligible. And when you get down to a certain level, you can just not even worry about them. All right, more people. Ian's here. Jim Marison, you're there. Anybody want to talk? Oh, Ian. Hi, Ian. How are you?
Very well, David. Thank you. Good to speak to you again. You described me earlier on as an etherist, so I thought I might say a few words just about it.
Sure.
First of all, you might be glad to hear that I'm not a person who uses ether as a sort of a catch-all for everything.
Right.
I mean, the jury is out, I think, on this. It may have other effects on gravity or whatnot, but that's not something I deal with. I deal purely with a luminiferous ether, or more generally, an ether that permits the propagation of electromagnetic radiation.
Right. Sure.
So, this has been done in many other respects, but I look at the analogy, which I hope you didn't appreciate too much earlier on, but the analogy between audio transmission and transmission of water waves and things like that, they're basically governed by the same mathematical equations, and you can get various parameters So in other words, so-called empty space does have certain properties, which are analogous to elasticity. You've mentioned some of these before, density. You have the permittivity and the permeability, and I maintain also the resistivity. So you have a sort of like an analogy of resistance per unit length, and inductance per unit length, and capacitance per unit length. And you just get different properties. I mean, you talked earlier about it being almost inconceivable that over, thousands of millions of light years, this thing could hardly dissipate. But I mean, the speed of light is so much greater than the speed of sound, and therefore the elasticity is so much greater. So what in water or in air, say, might dissipate in, say, hundreds of meters to, a fraction of its initial magnitude would take thousands of millions of light years in the ether, because the properties are so different. But you have basically these properties. Now, the other thing is, you have the system whereby the speed is independent of the speed of the source. It's not independent, I maintain, and others would as well, of the speed of the receiver, which is contrary to what special relativity says, because that says it's independent of both. But to my mind, and I know we could get into a long discussion about this, but to my mind, the problem with the purely particle theory is that you're then in a ballistic system, in that if it's a particle being emitted from a moving source, well then it's like a cannon which would be moving with a particular speed, and therefore would emit a cannonball, and you'd have to sum the two speeds, which you don't get because it's independent. So if you had a sort of an ether which is static, that would be independent of the speed of the source. Now, other thing I just might mention, just maybe a couple of other things. I personally don't take the ether as an absolute stationary reference frame for the...
Well, that was going to be a question of mine, because one of the things you never hear these modern ethers talk about is that. I mean, because the difference is, if you have a particle molecule, they travel, right? You don't have that problem of a reference, right? You don't have that problem of the Michelson-Morley. Are we standing still to the ether? Is that what you're talking about right now?
Well, I am. Yes, very much so. And I'm saying that the basic explanation of MMX is that there's practically no relative movement between the mainly entrained ether about the Earth's surface and the Earth. In fact, Michelson himself said that's one of the explanations. He didn't say the ether doesn't exist, or which came some years later, explains it all. Basically, that's the argument that he accepted, and I would accept as well. So, in other words, there's an ether which is in the vicinity of this large gravitational body called the Earth, and it drags it in its circular, in its elliptical orbit around the sun. But it basically practically doesn't drag it in its diurnal rotation, as been shown by various other experiments like Michelson and Gale and so on. And you'd similarly have an ether about the sun and a galactic ether and so on. So you can measure things relative to that, and therefore, if you apply the principles of hydrodynamics, the same principles, sort of Euler-Lagrange type systems, you find it actually coheres. It works very well, and you just get a speed which has to be taken into account, which is basically
a question I have for you, and I understand what you're saying, and I think this is very interesting conversation, because I think this is where people should be looking at ether a lot more than worrying about all kinds of other things, because this is a bothersome problem. So we have galaxies, and they are moving through space, and we have, of course, stars going around the center of galaxies, and we have planets going around those. Where's the ether fit in? That's sort of stationary. Again, in a model where particles move at the speed of light, it's moving. And if where it's emitted, yeah, it's a ballistic model. So you have, well, there's some explanation of how that works. But I'm curious as to where that frame is. Where, I mean, there's still a frame. I mean, it's moving. So does it sort of push around? Does the whole galaxy then move them between galaxies? Is it that case that they're slower between galaxies, less slow between stars? I don't. That part of it I don't understand.
And that's a very interesting discussion as well. Do you see, one of the big conundrums, I suppose, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th was that if Michelson's initial explanation, which I referred to a moment ago, of an entrained ether were true, well, then stellar aberration shouldn't occur, because it's as if you don't have any relative movement, and yet the movement of the Earth around the sun can be picked up. So what I've done actually is so I claim anyway, I've done a bit of analysis, and I've said that the system, the velocity, speed and direction that something experiences from being emitted in a particular ether environment is preserved, and the reason for that is you're getting refraction at the if there's any interface between one ether and another, and that's basically cancelling out the relative motion. So for example, you talked about very distant galaxies, but suppose you take something like Jupiter. Now, if you measure the it's the old Romer experiment, with the satellite of Jupiter, Io, which is going around, and if you take it when it's on opposite sides, well, of the Earth's orbit, you can find the speed of light. But if it's at 90 degrees, if it's in positive or negative quadrature, well, then the Earth is either moving towards Jupiter, or the Earth is moving away at its speed of revolution around the sun, and that has to be taken into account. So you actually have to take, say, VE is the speed of the Earth, C plus or minus VE. You actually have to measure that and put that into the equation, and you get the correct value. So you might say, well, how is that? If is it not captured by the Earth's ether and then brought around? Well, according to what I have analyzed, so I say that it was the light was emitted in the environment of the ether of Jupiter, and that actually remains. So the same thing would occur with binary stars, where we have binary stars where, independent of the motion of the star relative to the Earth, it is emitted in an ether which is in that proximity, and therefore it's the same, because the velocity of the source does not affect the the velocity with which the rays subsequently come to us. So it's a combination of those two things, really: the fact that you have local ethers, and also that the ether in which the light or electromagnetic radiation is originated is actually maintained. So it's the relativity, the relative velocity between our ether and the ether in which the radiation, was in the first place originated.
So you're talking about an entrained ether, is that correct?
So I'm talking about an entrained ether. Now, I think there was the Hammer experiment. There were some other experiments there in the list, but which the Rayleigh experiment as well. I think Lord Rayleigh did it, where you got a small, relatively small ball of metal or something, and you found it didn't seem to entrain ether. So it appears that small gravitational objects don't entrain ether, or if they do, it's immeasurable. But large masses, such as the Earth, very large masses do. Well, I claim that is the simplest explanation for obtaining a very low value of when you try to measure the relative speed between the ether and the Earth. So it largely does carry
right. Okay. Well, I'm going to take you down, but thank you so much. I think it is a very interesting. Somebody had mentioned, I took it down just now, about sort of like a ether is fixed basically, and things move through it and perturbs it. So, but I think it is a very interesting question that you're trying to resolve. Is, how, if ether's out there, how is it in space? Its velocity? Where is it? What's its density? And those things are really important in a theory. So, all right, I'm going to bring you down because we're almost at the end here. Thank you very much, Ian. Here's a question: ballistic argument. Well, the answer to that, Franklin, is if light is a particle, then the speed of light should depend on the velocity of the sender. It doesn't, because if it comes out in a model like we have, that is the speed of a particle around an atom is at the speed of c. It's going to be released at the speed of c. So that's a solution to that. So it's not an argument against. But I want to thank everybody who came on. I want to thank my dad for watching the chat out there coming on. I also want to thank Franklin for his many years of working with this and his great conversation civilly. Thank you. And also talking with Bob Gray and also Ian Cohen and all of you people in the chat. I know I didn't get a lot to them. I can see a lot of anger and a lot of folks. Again, what I would say to you is don't be married to anything, and don't get defensive about it, because that just shows either of two things: that you are emotionally attached to it, and that's not a good thing, or you have doubts about it and you're afraid to look at those. So what you always have to do is look at your biggest doubts, just like a psychologist does or a doctor does, the biggest pain, and then try to address that. So I think it's very important for us, especially etherists, to keep your open mind, realize that ether is one solution, not the only one, and for everyone to give everything a chance and be out there and realize. I always say, folks, we're all trying to come up with a model, and the person that's going to choose it ain't us. It's going to be just science in general. And if there's a model that one of us come up with, and it seems to push us in a new direction, and people more and more accept it, that's how it's going to be happening. Okay, so please keep your minds open and everything. So we're going to get out of here. It was a great discussion. Maybe we'll do another ether one, because I know since I've talked about it a lot, maybe do more just discussion and have people bring it up. But I apologize if I didn't get to all of your questions and comments, but I do appreciate all of you guys being here and your patronage. And remember, of course, to subscribe to our channels. If you're from a dissident science channel, please make sure, if you've enjoyed these, if you're watching a recording, make sure you click down on the like button. The more likes we get, the more exposure we get. And also click on that subscribe bell and the little push that up to the ringing bell, so that you will be alerted when our next video drops or we go live. And let's take it out with some of our videos. And remember, I'm David de Hilster. I am your science therapist, trying to get you the promised land. So stay critical, stay thinking, and ciao for now.